Science fiction has always been a mirror held slightly ahead of its time. It reflects not what will happen, but what a society fears might happen if its assumptions remain unchallenged. Long before technologies arrive, before systems harden into routine science fiction, sketches the emotional outlines of tomorrow, our hopes, our anxieties, and the quiet compromises we are willing to make along the way. During the 1970s through the mid-1990s, a particular strain of science fiction cinema emerged that did not celebrate the future. These films were not built around triumph, innovation, or escape. They were built around consequence, around systems that functioned too well, around progress that arrived without wisdom, around societies that adapted not by becoming better, but by becoming colder, more efficient, and more distant from the values that once defined them. At the time, these visions felt uncomfortable. They lacked heroes who could fix everything. They offered no clear turning point where humanity learned its lesson. Instead, they suggested something far more unsettling, that the future might not collapse dramatically, but settle into place through quiet decisions, administrative logic, and gradual acceptance. Many of these films were dismissed, ignored, or quietly left behind. Hollywood chose brighter futures, faster stories, cleaner promises. But futures do not disappear simply because they are rejected. They wait. What gives these films their lingering power is not the accuracy of their technology, but the clarity of their insight. They understood how people respond to pressure, how institutions protect stability over justice, how convenience replaces responsibility, how progress, once normalized, stops feeling like a choice at all. These films were not predicting devices or dates, they were mapping behavior. Today, revisiting these abandoned visions feels different. Their worlds no longer seem exaggerated. Their restraint feels intentional. Their pessimism feels measured. What once appeared bleak now feels familiar, not because the future unfolded exactly as they imagined, but because the patterns they identified never went away. This episode explores 15 science fiction action films that presented futures audiences were not ready to face. Futures that were treated seriously by their creators and quietly set aside by the industry. Together, they form a fragmented archive of tomorrow's stories that were too early, too honest, or too uncomfortable to embrace. As the countdown begins, the question is not which of these futures came true. The deeper question is why so many of them were easier to abandon than to confront. And whether even now we are still choosing optimism over recognition, when the two no longer point in the same direction. No Escape, 1994. The future in No Escape is defined not by technological excess, but by institutional withdrawal. Faced with social failure, the system does not reform itself. It isolates the problem. Responsibility is relocated. Order is preserved by narrowing who is allowed to belong. The film imagines a penal colony designed to function without oversight, where authority abandons involvement and survival reorganizes itself around dominance. Civilization does not collapse, it contracts. Justice is replaced by management. Problems are contained rather than confronted. At its center, No Escape examines exclusion as policy. When efficiency becomes the highest value, removal becomes an acceptable solution. Stability is maintained by pushing disorder out of sight. The future appears calm because its consequences are displaced elsewhere. Audiences found this vision unsettling because it required little imagination. The film extended existing practices to their logical conclusion, offering a future rooted in administration rather than invention. Without advanced technology or spectacle, the scenario felt disturbingly plausible. Revisited now, No Escape feels uncomfortably precise. Societies often manage disorder by isolating it rather than resolving its causes. The film endures because it suggests that the most dangerous futures are not built through ambition, but through quiet decisions justified as practical, reasonable, and necessary. Nemesis, 1992. The world of Nemesis is built on replacement. Flesh gives way to machinery. Identity becomes modular. Survival depends on constant adaptation, leaving little room for reflection or continuity. Technology does not assist humanity here. It overtakes it. The film follows an enforcer navigating a landscape where augmentation defines status and power. Mechanical upgrades are not optional enhancements. They are requirements for relevance. As bodies become interchangeable, the concept of a stable self begins to erode. Memory, loyalty, and morality lose coherence under the pressure to evolve. What Nemesis explores is technological integration without intention. Improvement becomes perpetual, driven by competition rather than purpose. When change never pauses, identity fragments. The human element does not vanish dramatically. It thins out, replaced piece by piece, until distinction loses meaning. Audiences in the early 1990s struggled with this vision. Cyberpunk was often expected to carry rebellion or style. Nemesis delivered brutality instead. Its future was transactional, emotionally vacant, and stripped of philosophical distance. Seen today, the film's concerns feel increasingly grounded. As technology merges with bodies and decision-making becomes automated, the question of where humanity ends becomes practical rather than abstract. Nemesis lingers because it suggests that evolution may occur without direction, eroding identity, without ever announcing the moment it begins. 3 Dark Angel, 1990. The future in Dark Angel is not distant or theoretical. It is immediate, urban, and already compromised. Technology has advanced, but the social fabric meant to contain it has frayed. What emerges is not a sleek vision of tomorrow, but a city where progress accelerates existing damage rather than repairing it. The film unfolds in an environment shaped by inequality, addiction, and institutional strain. Advanced tools and alien technology circulate through black markets and criminal networks, amplifying exploitation instead of stability. Law enforcement exists, but it functions reactively, struggling to keep pace with systems that reward harm. The future does not replace the present. It intensifies it. At its core, Dark Angel examines how progress distributes itself unevenly. Innovation does not arrive as a universal benefit. It flows toward power, deepening imbalance and turning vulnerability into resource. Bodies become commodities. Survival becomes transactional. Advancement sharpens the edges of an already fractured society. This vision felt abrasive when the film was released. Audiences were accustomed to science fiction that framed technology as aspirational or transformative. Dark Angel offered neither. Its future was dirty, tense, and unresolved, refusing to separate technological growth from social decay. Revisited now, the film feels direct rather than excessive. Innovation often amplifies existing power structures instead of correcting them. Dark Angel endures because it understands that the future may not arrive as a clean break, but as a continuation of unresolved problems made faster, more efficient, and harder to escape. 4 Moontrap, 1989. In Moontrap, the future is approached as an archaeological problem. Progress is no longer measured by expansion, but by what remains after civilizations disappear. Space exploration becomes an encounter with unresolved consequences rather than heroic discovery. The film follows the discovery of ancient technology that continues operating long after its creators are gone. These systems persist without context, driven by directives that no longer align with survival or intent. Advancement once set in motion resists correction. What was designed to endure becomes impossible to contain. At its center, Moontrap questions the assumption that longevity is inherently valuable. Systems built to last may outlive the understanding that shaped them. Intelligence without restraint becomes hazardous. Progress detached from oversight transforms into inheritance without consent. Audiences expected science fiction set in space to emphasize momentum and possibility. Moontrap offered hesitation instead. Its future was cautious, defensive, and suspicious of unchecked advancement. Without spectacle or conquest, the film faded quickly. Viewed today, its concerns feel increasingly relevant. Technologies now persist beyond their original purpose, shaping environments they were never meant to inhabit. Moontrap lingers because it suggests that the greatest danger of progress is not failure, but endurance systems that continue long after anyone remembers why they were created. 5 Cherry 2000 1987. The future imagined by Cherry 2000 is built around protection, specifically protection from emotional risk. In a society shaped by instability, relationships are reorganized to minimize vulnerability. Intimacy is regulated. Desire is customized. Connection becomes something that can be managed rather than endured. The film presents a world where artificial partners replace the unpredictability of human relationships. Contracts define commitment. Compatibility is calculated. Emotional exposure is treated as inefficient. What remains is not isolation, but a controlled approximation of connection that prioritizes safety over depth. What Cherry 2000 explores is the quiet cost of emotional optimization. When systems are designed to prevent pain, they also prevent growth. Love becomes transactional. Attachment becomes conditional. Technology does not eliminate feeling, it reshapes it into forms that discourage genuine risk. Audiences initially viewed this future as eccentric, even playful. The film avoided the visual language of dystopia, presenting its world as a practical adaptation rather than a collapse. This restraint made its implications easy to dismiss. Seen now, the film feels uncomfortably familiar. As technology increasingly mediates how relationships begin, function, and end, the line between convenience and intimacy continues to blur. Cherry 2000 endures because it suggests that the future may not destroy connection outright, but slowly replace it with something safer, easier, and far less demanding. 6. The Philadelphia Experiment, 1984. The future in the Philadelphia Experiment is not discovered. It is stumbled into unprepared and unwilling. Progress arrives as a side effect of ambition, leaving behind consequences no one planned to manage. The film treats time not as a frontier, but as a fracture, one that does not heal simply because technology made it possible. The story follows individuals displaced by a military experiment designed to gain strategic advantage. When the test succeeds, it does not deliver control or clarity. It delivers dislocation. The future offers no orientation, no explanation, and no path back. Survival becomes psychological before it becomes physical, defined by confusion rather than conflict. At its core, the film examines innovation without foresight. Advancement is measured by capability, not responsibility. The system works as intended, but its human cost is treated as collateral rather than failure. Identity unravels when context is removed and belonging becomes impossible to restore. This vision felt unsatisfying to audiences expecting spectacle or paradox-driven excitement. The Philadelphia Experiment offered neither. Its future was subdued, unresolved, and emotionally destabilizing. There was no triumph in discovery, only the realization that some doors once opened cannot be safely closed. Revisited today, the film's warning feels grounded. Progress often outpaces ethical frameworks, leaving people to absorb consequences long after decisions are made. The Philadelphia Experiment lingers because it suggests that the most dangerous futures are not those that go wrong, but those that technically succeed without regard for who must live inside them. 7. Cloak and Dagger, 1984. The future depicted in Cloak and Dagger arrives too early. It reaches into childhood before comprehension is formed, collapsing the boundary between imagination and consequence. Technology does not wait for maturity. It inserts itself fully without context or warning. The film follows a child drawn into a world shaped by digital secrets and global conflict. Information becomes dangerous not because of its content, but because of its reach. Reality blurs with simulation. Imagination becomes a refuge rather than a game, a way to process forces that feel too large to understand. What Cloak and Dagger examines is exposure without preparation, Systems designed for power operate indiscriminately, touching lives without regard for readiness. The future does not announce itself. It intrudes. Innocence is not destroyed by violence, but by premature complexity. This vision was difficult to place when the film was released. It was neither fully playful nor comfortably dark. Its warnings were easy to miss because they were embedded in familiar narrative shapes. Hollywood moved on, uncertain how to frame a future that felt too close to everyday life. Seen now, the film feels precise. Technology increasingly enters lives before frameworks for understanding exist. Cloak and Dagger resonates because it suggests that the most lasting consequences of progress are not experienced by those who build systems, but by those who inherit them without choice. 8. Night of the Comet, 1984. In Night of the Comet, the end of the world does not arrive as spectacle. It arrives as absence. Streets are empty. Buildings remain. Infrastructure continues functioning. Civilization has vanished without drama, leaving behind a perfectly usable shell, with no one left to use it properly. The film follows survivors navigating a city frozen in routine. Shelves are stocked. Electricity flows. Roads stretch endlessly forward. Yet the structures that once gave these spaces meaning, community obligation, shared purpose, are gone. Survival becomes a matter of habit rather than resistance. The future feels strangely weightless. What the film captures is the hollowness that follows collapse when systems outlive the people they were designed to serve. Functionality persists, but direction disappears. Comfort becomes disorienting. The world looks familiar, yet behaves differently, stripped of the social fabric that once held it together. Audiences struggled with this tone. Apocalyptic stories were expected to dramatize loss or rebuild meaning. Night of the Comet did neither. It treated emptiness as the defining condition of the future, not destruction. Revisited today, the film feels unsettlingly calm. A society can dissolve without losing its infrastructure. Night of the Comet endures because it suggests that the future may not feel catastrophic. It may feel quiet, intact, and profoundly disconnected from the lives it once supported. 9. Firefox, 1982. The future envisioned by Firefox is not loud. It is tense, internal, and profoundly psychological. Power no longer rests in visible weapons or overwhelming force. It moves inward into the fragile terrain of thought itself. Control is no longer exercised through command, but through cognition. The film centers on a conflict where a single machine threatens to redefine warfare. This weapon does not respond to switches or orders. It responds to intention, to hesitation, to doubt. Victory depends not on physical dominance, but on mental discipline. The battlefield becomes invisible, and the margin for error narrows to a single thought. What Firefox explores is the erosion of distance between human decision-making and automated response. When machines interpret intention directly, the human mind becomes both operator and liability. Error is no longer mechanical. It is emotional. Responsibility becomes difficult to assign because failure originates where no one can observe it. At the time of its release, this future felt abstract. Audiences expected science fiction to externalize danger, to make threat visible and tangible. Firefox offered restraint instead. Its tension was internal, its consequences delayed its victories, incomplete. Viewed now, the film feels strikingly grounded. As systems increasingly rely on biometric input, predictive behavior, and cognitive signals, the separation between human agency and automation continues to shrink. Firefox lingers because it understands that the most decisive conflicts of the future may occur silently inside the human mind, long before anyone realizes control has shifted. 10. Wolfen, 1981. The future in Wolfen does not arrive from space or from laboratories. It emerges from the cracks of the modern city. Abandoned neighborhoods, stalled developments, and neglected communities form the landscape of a world where progress has moved forward without understanding what it leaves behind. The film frames its conflict through investigation rather than invention. Surveillance tools, forensic technology, and institutional authority are present, but they are blind to the forces they have displaced. Rational systems attempt to map a reality shaped by history, ecology, and memory elements they were never designed to read. What Wolfen confronts is the idea that expansion carries consequence. Urban growth does not erase what existed before it. It presses against it. When development accelerates without accountability, tension accumulates in places technology cannot reach. Control becomes illusionary. Audiences found this future difficult to categorize. It lacked sleek machinery and distant timelines. Its warnings were grounded in the present, embedded in patterns of displacement and neglect. Without a clear technological antagonist, the film felt out of place. Seen now, Wolfen resonates as a meditation on modern blindness. Progress often measures success in construction and data while ignoring the cultural and environmental costs beneath it. The film endures because it suggests that the future is not something we arrive at. It is something we provoke often without noticing until it pushes back. 11. The Black Hole, 1979. Isolation defines the future of the black hole. Not isolation as punishment, but as permanence. The film unfolds aboard a drifting structure where technology continues to operate flawlessly, long after ethical direction has vanished. Order remains. Meaning does not. The narrative follows explorers encountering a closed system governed by automation and routine. Human presence is minimal, and moral decision-making has been replaced by procedure. Machines preserve structure without questioning its purpose. Stability is maintained not because it is just, but because it is functional. At the center of the film is a warning about endurance. Systems designed to last will do so regardless of context. When oversight disappears, technology does not fail gracefully. It persists. What remains is a form of order, stripped of empathy, sustained by habit rather than intention. Audiences struggled with this vision because it defied expectation. Released under a banner associated with wonder and optimism, The Black Hole offered ambiguity, confinement, and unresolved consequence. There was no triumph, no expansion, no reassurance that humanity remained in control of its creations. Revisited today, the film feels less anomalous. Institutions and technologies often outlive the values that created them. The Black Hole unsettles because it suggests that the greatest danger is not chaos, but continuity without conscience, systems that keep going simply because stopping was never part of their design. 12. Future World, 1976. The future imagined by Future World is smooth, controlled, and deceptively calm. There is no visible oppression, no obvious catastrophe. Instead, there is choice, endless, curated, and carefully managed. The danger here is not rebellion or malfunction, but comfort taken to its logical extreme. The film returns to a world where artificial environments exist to simulate experience without consequence. Visitors are invited to test desire power and risk inside systems designed to absorb the fallout. Beneath this spectacle, however, something quieter is unfolding. Identity becomes reproducible. Authority becomes invisible. Reality becomes optional. The boundary between participation and observation slowly dissolves. What Future World explores is the cost of removing consequence from experience. When actions can be reset, responsibility weakens. When identity can be replaced, accountability fades. Control does not need to announce itself. It embeds quietly into routine, preference, and design. The system does not coerce, it persuades. This vision felt exaggerated when the film was released. Audiences saw entertainment and novelty rather than infrastructure. The threat was not loud enough, the conflict not sharp enough. Compared to more aggressive visions of artificial intelligence or authoritarian control, Future World seemed restrained, even tame. Viewed now, its restraint feels deliberate. Systems that manage behavior rarely rely on force. They rely on convenience. Future World lingers because it understands that the most effective forms of control are those that feel like freedom until the freedom itself becomes indistinguishable from the system providing it. 13. Damnation Alley, 1977. In Damnation Alley, the end of the world is not dramatic. It is administrative. The catastrophe has already happened, and what follows is not revelation, but logistics. Civilization persists in fragments held together by routine rather than vision. The film unfolds across a nuclear-devastated landscape where survival depends on movement, not hope. Technology still exists, but it no longer promises progress. It functions as transportation defense and containment. There is no rebuilding ideology here, only the instinct to keep going through terrain that offers no lessons and no redemption. What makes Damnation Alley distinct is its emotional restraint. The characters are not symbols of renewal. They are participants in a system that has already failed them. The future does not inspire fear or awe. It inspires fatigue. Collapse is treated as a condition, not an event. This perspective clashed with audience expectations in the late 1970s. Science fiction was expected to either warn through spectacle or offer hope through reinvention. Damnation Alley did neither. It suggested that large-scale failure rarely produces clarity. It produces adaptation without understanding. Revisiting the film, now its vision feels grounded. Societies rarely collapse all at once. They erode unevenly, leaving people to manage consequences rather than causes. Damnation Alley was overlooked because it offered no catharsis, only the quiet implication that the future once broken does not reset. It simply continues altered and diminished in the absence of a better plan. 14. Zardoz, 1974. The future in Zardoz does not suffer from scarcity. It suffers from permanence. Survival has been solved. Death has been eliminated. What remains is a civilization trapped inside its own success, unable to change, unable to decay, and unable to move forward. The film presents a stark division between two worlds. Outside, life is violent and short, driven by instinct and domination. Inside, an immortal elite exists within a controlled environment where pain, aging, and risk have been erased. At first glance, this appears to be the goal of progress. But the longer the film lingers, the clearer its critique becomes. Immortality has not produced wisdom. It has produced paralysis. In this world, culture stagnates. Creativity turns inward. Conflict becomes procedural rather than meaningful. Without death, there is no urgency. Without consequence, there is no evolution. Technology maintains stability, but stability itself becomes decay, stretched across eternity. The system does not fail. It simply outlives its purpose. Audiences in the 1970s rejected this vision because it contradicted a deeply held belief that longer life and greater control naturally lead to better societies. Zardoz suggested the opposite. It argued that limitation is not a flaw, but a condition for meaning. That struggle is not an error to be corrected, but a force that drives change. Seen today, the film's ideas feel less abstract. A culture obsessed with optimization, longevity, and insulation from discomfort risks losing the tensions that make life dynamic. Zardoz remains unsettling because it frames the ultimate technological achievement not as triumph, but as a slow, irreversible stagnation. 15. Silent Running, 1972. There is no explosion in the future imagined by Silent Running. No final battle. No moment when humanity realizes it has gone too far. The world has already ended in quieter ways. What remains is order, efficiency, and the careful maintenance of what little life is left, sealed behind glass and drifting far from the place it once belonged. The film takes place aboard massive space freighters carrying Earth's last surviving forests. These environments are preserved not out of reverence, but obligation. They exist because someone decided they should be archived, not because anyone expects them to return. At the center of this system is a lone caretaker, tasked with maintenance rather than protection, performing duties that feel increasingly ceremonial. What silent running explores is not environmental disaster, but emotional distance. Nature has been reduced to cargo. Preservation has become procedure. Decisions are made according to efficiency and cost, not meaning. When priorities change, the forests are not debated as living worlds, but evaluated as expendable assets. The future does not argue with the past. It simply outgrows it. This vision was difficult to accept in the early 1970s. Audiences expected science fiction to offer either warning through catastrophe or hope through innovation. Silent Running offered neither. It suggested that collapse could be managed, documented, and normalized. That loss could become routine. That progress might continue smoothly, even as something essential disappeared forever. Revisited now, the film feels uncomfortably precise. Environmental concern often survives as language, while decisions quietly move in the opposite direction. Preservation becomes symbolic rather than practical. Silent Running lingers because it understands that the most dangerous futures are not those where everything breaks, but those where systems continue functioning while meaning is quietly removed. These films were never wrong about the future. They were simply honest, at a time when honesty was inconvenient. Each of them offered a vision shaped not by spectacle, but by observation, by watching how systems behave. Once efficiency replaces care, once control feels safer than understanding, once progress no longer asks permission from consequence. What links these futures is not prediction, but pattern. Quiet abandonment, gradual normalization, decisions framed as practical, reasonable, and necessary. None of these worlds collapse overnight. They settle. They stabilize. They continue functioning long after something essential has been removed. That is why they were easy to dismiss. They did not shout. They lingered. Looking back now, these films feel less like warnings and more like records. Not of what would happen, but of how it would feel. The emotional temperature of societies that adapt instead of resist. The stillness that follows when responsibility is distributed thinly enough to disappear. The calm that arrives when difficult questions are postponed rather than answered. Vaulted futures are not erased. They are deferred. Set aside until reality begins to resemble what was once labeled excessive, pessimistic, or unnecessary. When that moment arrives, the stories return not as fiction, but as reference. The question left behind is not which of these futures came true. It is simpler and more unsettling than that. Which assumptions about progress are still being protected today? And when the present is revisited, years from now, which of its promises will be remembered as another future we chose not to face, when we still had time to question it?